Hey, this is an interview with Bo Winegard, who is a professor of psychology, and he does a lot of research into biases and even research into how there is a bias within bias research. We dive into that specifically. We also dive into the left-right spectrum and centrism and a lot of other issues with regards to how the current public discourse is manifesting itself. Certain, perhaps, pathologies, one might say, within ultra-progressivism and what he and his brother Ben Winegard term as wokeness or hyper-wokeness or something like that. So I'm just going to slish us right into the discussion. Here's Bo Winegard. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, absolutely.
On the internet.
Yeah.
I'm really impressed with your work on Quillette. I've been going back through there. I just read your equalitarianism article.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which was another very rigorous and yet accessible article.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah.
And
that's the original the original data now in an article, which was kind of my dissertation, is at the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. So we'll see what happens to it.
What do you mean it's at there? Like it's
I mean, it's under review.
Okay. Yeah.
The article my colleagues and I wrote, it's under review. So we'll see.
Mm-hmm. Do you expect some pushback?
Yes.
And why? Because of the biases in the readers?
Yeah, because of the biases in the field. And I've had my own experiences with, I don't mind critical reviews, but I've had very hostile reviews that were clearly motivated. But, we'll see. One thing is the editor really matters, because the editor can send it to reviewers whom he or she knows will give you bad reviews,
Yeah.
Or can be fair-minded and get it to people who might be critical but wouldn't be biased against it. Mm-hmm. So I guess we're just hoping we get good reviewers.
Well, and that's particularly fascinating because an article about bias would inspire biases.
Illicit bias. Yeah.
Which is exactly what you're critiquing.
Which almost confirms the point in the paper, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Well, here we are.
Yeah, and in the article you said that bias is almost impossible to quantify. Maybe not almost impossible. And why is that? Is it too complex of a phenomena, or?
It's, okay, so the big problem, it seems to me, is distinguishing rational Bayesian processes, that is rational priors and updating, from irrational bias. So a lot of the traditional studies on bias, you would get, I'm just going to simplify it, but it would give you a vignette, say, about, hey, we're going to do a study on the effects of the death penalty, and here are the methods we're going to use. And then they would give you a conclusion, like it found that the death penalty deters crime, or it found that it didn't. And then the idea is liberals would find the methods more, exacting, more kosher, if you will, if it supported results that they wanted. But then I guess the criticism is, if I think it's very likely that the death penalty is a deterrent for crime, let's say, and you give me results and they find that it's not a deterrent, it's not unreasonable for me to be skeptical of your methods, right? So the example I like to give is the, if I say, hey, I found that people can see into the future, are you skeptical of my methods? It wouldn't be irrational for you to be like, yeah, I'm very skeptical. Something must have went wrong there. Mm-hmm. So that's the problem that we've been really thinking about and trying to figure out. Is there a way around that? Is there a way we can say this isn't just the result of a rational prior?
Mm-hmm. And you, in the article, you mentioned several examples where progressivists tended to be more biased than conservatives.
Yes.
And conservatives were willing to treat the data fairly, whereas progressives always questioned or were skeptical with something that came to conclusions that were at odds with their.
Yes, although I would say the result. I mean, I'd have to look at all of the results, because it's like. I would say the conservatives are really complicated. The progressives are actually what we called liberals in the paper, because I know it was called progressive in the Quillette article, but in the paper it was based on just a political orientation scale from conservative to liberal. Okay. The liberals there was a very clear pattern, right? Anytime a privileged group, that is basically white men, did better than a perceived victims group, women, African Americans, etc., they did not like it. They did not like data that said the privileged group was higher on some trait, intelligence. What was I think everything we used was basically intelligence. Because we had just kind of perfected that vignette and wanted to really hone in on that. So, but the concern. So we compared, vignettes that would say men scored higher than women, or women scored higher than men, and the progressives didn't like it when men scored higher. And then we did it where it would be the liberals, where it would be African Americans score higher or white score higher. And again, liberals didn't like it if the white scored higher. The conservative pattern. Yeah, so you are correct. In some cases, they seem to rate it about equally, but it was a weird pattern. So conservatives did seem to find it more. The methods were better, or I think that's the way to put it. The methods were better when women were smarter than men. Right. So they did kind of have a bias there that seemed to match the liberal bias. I don't think it was as strong, but it was going in that direction, yeah. But on the race one, they actually seem to have the reverse. I hesitate to call it a preference, but belief maybe, such that they found it more convincing when whites scored higher. So then the question is, of course, is that a bias, or are they just more aware of the psychometric data? Are they aware of the scores on cognitive tests? Either
that, or does it match up with perspective that they get from interactions with the media, interactions with daily life?
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And it's not clear at all. We have no idea. And in fact, I've said to my co-authors, and I have talked about this, and you could write an entire paper just on conservatives. Like this one, we were kind of focusing on liberals because we had predictions about liberals a priori, but the conservative pattern is really interesting, is worth thinking about in more detail than we have.
Mm-hmm. Have you thought about the reasons behind the liberal biases?
Yes, a lot. And I have a theory, and I'll forward it. I should say I don't have a lot of evidence to support it.
Okay.
My theory is that liberals have higher inequality aversion, and that has been found. Even John Jost, who's generally critical of conservatives and more laudatory of liberals, would make the same argument. So liberals are more averse to inequality, and then they confront a world in which various minority groups are actually performing less well than other groups. And you have to answer why, right? So they have to answer why. Now, you could just say, well, it turns out different groups have different capacities and, like it's a meritocratic system, but that would cause serious consternation since they don't like inequality, right? Mm-hmm. So it's just an easier answer, easier is perhaps the wrong word. It's more psychologically comforting to suggest that, okay, what must be going on is that society's not fair. and that everyone would be equal, or every group, let's say, would be equal if society were fair. And then the question is, well, who's to blame? And I think the answer there is, well, the powerful people must be, to use like a Bernie Sanders phrase, they must be rigging the system somehow, right? So that's my theory. That's a theory with multiple causal links that I have not tested.
Do you think that perhaps that is the consequence of thinking at the group level rather than the individual level?
Okay.
Like once we start thinking about the groups or thinking of society as a collection of groups, does that predispose us to systematic thinking or seeing patterns on that level that predisposes inequality as deriving from oppression rather than a difference in how cultural groups unify under cultural patterns and what those groups and individual cultures prioritize as status?
I think I get what you're saying. So in other words, if I'm a liberal and I look at the world and I see clusters of people, I see white males, I see African Americans, I see Arabs, etc., and then I notice average disparities, does that predispose me to thinking this way? And the alternative would be I look at society and I see some people who are more successful than others because they have certain traits, or they have discipline, ambition, etc., and I don't see it in terms of groups. Yeah. Well, that's an interesting question, and actually that's an interesting suggestion. So I suppose if that were true, you would find people who were less prone to essentializing these groups or less prone to breaking up society into these groups would have a lower bias here, right? They would have less bias, I would guess. Do you know if there's? I don't actually know what your background is, but do you know if there's any? I'm just trying to think about individual differences in essentializing or in seeing the world in these groups. Like, do we know if there are individual differences, and are liberals more prone to it? I'm not sure.
Individual differences on the level of the individual or on the level of the group?
So I was thinking both. So individual differences just across groups, and then are liberals more prone to doing it than conservatives? And I don't know the answer to that. I'm skeptical that they are, but you might be right. I don't know.
Okay, yeah. Well,
but it's an interesting idea.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder if there's something about what you're talking about earlier with even conservatives have when they rate men and women and test scores, they're more willing to say that women are, or they're less skeptical when women are smarter.
When women are smarter,
If that could be broken down into, do we have like a baseline progressive tendency in our culture that even the conservatives are progressive on that level? Or is there even like deeper than that, a psychological predilection towards favoring women over men across groups?
Right. So I guess on the second point, there may be some tendency towards favoring women in some ways, but certainly like intellectual history would suggest that many people haven't had a problem denouncing the capacity of women to reason, right? So like, I'm just thinking, if you go back and you read a lot of philosophers, Schopenhauer being a great example of somebody who thought women were like utterly incapable of reasoning, Freud, Nietzsche, etc. But the first point is a really interesting one, right? Because that suggests that actually, at least in our society, there's a pro-woman bias, if anything, right? And in fact, that's what we find over and over again. And furthermore, this is only in academia that they did this study, but Cece and Williams did a study and found, it was a very careful set of studies, and found that universities were more likely to hire women when they had equally qualified candidates, more likely to hire women over men. So there is, I don't want to go too far with it without contemplating it further, but at least in rhetoric, there is probably a pro-woman bias. I think that's reasonably fair to say.
Mm-hmm. And when and that could be broken down even further in relationship to, do we presuppose a bias that women are better teachers than men?
Right. So there are all kinds of things going on, right?
Which makes bias almost impossible to trace back.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
There's such a nest of causes and intentions and variables.
Right. That's why I haven't gotten very far with the testing the causal model, because exactly as you say, it's incredibly complicated. So I thought the first important step is to study this form of bias that almost everybody else ignores, right? This what we call equalitarianism. Because one thing that frustrated me, or has frustrated me, and I in no way want to disparage, say, heterodox or whatever. They do great things. And there was a behavioral and brain sciences paper. Duarte was the first author. John Haidt was on it, among others. And it's a good paper about political bias and basically in social psychology. But it was frustrating to me because they didn't even talk about this bias with group differences, which I think is easily the most pronounced bias in social psychology and the social sciences more broadly. You cannot talk about potential group differences, right? It's just, it is a taboo that is much stronger than any of the taboos that are often talked about. Like, so it's suggested that conservatives have a hard time in academia, and I think there's truth to that. But I would not feel uncomfortable in any way voicing support for, say, gun rights, or for moving the marginal tax rate down a couple percentage points. I would feel very concerned voicing opinions about group differences, etc., right? And I know a lot of other people who would be concerned to do that as well.
Could you give an example?
Yeah, like an example, say, differences between men and women in variation in intelligence, right? So there's a theory that there's greater male variability, and therefore at the very tip top of the distribution, there are more men than women. But there are also more men in the very bottom of the distribution. I'm not an expert on IQ variation, but that, from my understanding from the literature, is that that's a perfectly reasonable hypothesis, and it's supported by a lot of data. But I would be comfortable to say that with a lot of people, but I can see why people would be concerned to say something like that in academia. Like, those are the kinds of comments that seem to cause problems, rather than talking about, say, conservative family values or something.
Yeah. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that particular?
I think we're equalitarians.
Could you define that then? What's an equalitarian?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we defined it as cosmic egalitarianism, and cosmic egalitarianism was kind of a play on a term from Thomas Sowell's concept of cosmic justice. So cosmic egalitarianism is this doctrine that all groups are basically equal on all socially valued traits. So all racial groups are equal, men and women are equal, etc. So you've got that doctrine, and then equalitarians they're convinced that racism and sexism are ubiquitous, right? And they want you combine those two, commitments with also a strong commitment to working to eliminate all forms of bigotry from society, and you basically get equalitarianism. That's what the scale is designed to measure, is these three facets.
And the article that you wrote with your brother Ben, it talks about wokeness, which seems like it's a particular manifestation of equalitarianism. It's ratcheted up. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that is true.
Radicalized or?
Yeah, like a very radical form of it, coupled with a lot of status signaling. Right? So, because I think the thing is, I think a lot of people are sincere. A lot of, let's say the equalitarian, let's pick out that group of people. Those are people with sincere concerns, many of which I share, by the way, about, the effects of racism, etc. I think what happens in the world of wokeness, if you will, is that you probably still have, these true concerns, these seeds of true concerns, but they blossom into these grotesque signaling flowers, right? Just like a lot of it is about signaling, I'm very educated, I'm intelligent, I'm so open-minded, lots of these traits. I'm a member of the elite. And because I have all of these very bizarre beliefs about the world, and those show how committed I am to this moral vision that the elite share.
Mm-hmm. And have you thought about, have you noticed that tendency in yourself, or have you noticed yourself avoiding that tendency?
Wow.
Not to psychologize. I just wonder,
no.
From
Absolutely.
a personal perspective, it's tempting, and it's addictive.
I am sure that I do a lot of signaling. I think it's a fundamental human motivation is to strive for status and to signal traits to other people that would help one get status. So I'm definitely, I'm certain that I'm a signal sender. Now, so yes, I do think about this a lot, actually. And I guess I just try to be relentlessly self-critical and think about, when am I signaling in a way that's totally counterproductive? So I think in some sense, I think the signaling is orthogonal to the value of what you're doing. It's like a lot of things that are signaling are also good, right? So if you're giving to charity and you're doing it partially because you're signaling your altruism, that's good. I would like to encourage more of that, right? So if we're signaling as scientists about how intelligent we are, and that leads to the truth, then that's a good thing.
Yeah.
The problem is when the signaling gets distorted and it's counterproductive. Yeah. And one thing that I don't know if this concerns you or what you think about this, but I'm interested to hear it. But one thing that most concerns me about, I guess, woke culture is that it's extremely alienating to a lot of people, right? So instead of creating these broad coalitions of people who really could fight for social justice, the woke warriors alienate a lot of them and then turn it into this sort of wedge issue, right? They irritate a lot of everyday Americans. Are like, I don't want anything to do with that, right? Yeah.
I made a critique of that. My personal timeline is I started reporting on the Evergreen State College situation in spring of 2017, and then I moved on and I investigated the Laurier situation with Lindsay Shepard, and I looked into the dynamics of what was going on at the college. And at that point, I started to formulate that. For instance, with Laurier, there's trans people who are trans, and they have a number of societal issues. Like they have historical, quantifiable difficulties, personally and then societally. Then you have the activists that want to act on behalf of the actual trans people. The activists treat everything as a war, treat everything as a fight, and they begin to model behavior in order to change society. But they do it in such a way that they misrepresent the trans people. And after starting reporting on this stuff, I got contacted by a number of trans people who didn't want to have anything to do with the trans rights activists, with their illiberalism, with their behavior. And so what I saw is that for whatever reason, the trans rights activists, they're not acting on behalf of the trans people. They're acting on behalf of the cause. And they're acting on behalf of their own egos. And what they end up doing is distorting the perception of society towards actual trans people,
Right.
such that society is more sluggish or slower to actually allow the trans people to be accepted.
Right.
And the problem with, and the further problem is that any true activists wants to outmode their activism. They want to get to a place where their activism is no longer needed.
Yeah.
Right.
So their own obsolescence is sort of built into the activism, right?
Yeah, and I see like this riptide of people not actually wanting to solve the problem, and so distorting the facts and finding like with regards to racism, going from actual structural racism into microaggressions, into smaller and smaller implicit biases, looking for more and more things to be active about.
Yes.
Which ends up like actually agitating that which would, in my perspective, would just naturally progress. Like it takes too much energy for people to be bigots, because they're missing out on the resources of the people that they're being bigoted against. So,
in a market system, especially, right?
In a market, a market system.
Yeah, no, I think what you said. I'm certainly not an expert on the Lindsay Shepherd or the Evergreen State. That's the Weinstein.
Weinstein.
Yeah, Weinstein. I mean, I've read about both of them, and they seem kind of shameful, and both cases seemed unfortunate. But yeah, I think you're exactly right. And I think that's where signaling can explain some of this behavior, because again, I do want to be clear. I think that the activists start with like this earnest concern, but it just kind of metamorphosizes, right?
Yeah.
It changes. How about that? It changes into this, signaling performance, and then you're almost competing with other people to see how extreme you can take it to signal how committed you are. Like, well, if you're going to say that Gerber is sexist, I'm going to go all the way and say that Ritz crackers are sexist, right? Like, who can make the most ludicrous claim about sexism? So yeah, I think that, but the signaling doesn't have to do that. It seems as though it tends to, and that's where I would emphasize being self-critical and thinking a lot about, is this really advancing the cause that I care about? I mean, can I let this one go and attempt to find compromise so that I get a broader coalition of people who are willing to help me in my cause? Or am I going to call somebody out on Twitter for saying something that was vaguely offensive and then alienate them and everybody who liked them? You know? Exactly.
I wonder if you wrote a couple of articles on centrism. And when I read I think it was the second one that you wrote, it really jived with like my conception of centrism is not taking a position, but being invested in the meeting of positions. Like I don't care about the position. I want to see how they interact, and I want to be engaged with positions interacting. Like that's what I conceive of centrism as. It's a productive stance towards issues.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And well, my question is, do you think that we can incentivize that sort of behavior rather than, it seems like social media is incentivizing polarization. Can we incentivize the opposite of not depolarization, but like the interaction between the poles?
Engaging ideas open-mindedly, etc. I have thought about this for a very, I don't want to give myself too much credit. I was going to say sedulously. I have thought about this carefully, let's say, and I just don't know how you make that kind of open-mindedness and pragmatism is what I would call it, this understanding that we have to have these debates and have both sides have a good-natured dialogue. And sometimes that can get heated as long as we're not insulting each other's motives, right? But that's just not, social media is almost perfectly designed, one might say, to discourage that. Because just take, for example, Twitter, where I'm probably more active than I even should be. What I notice is the centrism takes, nobody likes them. So, you say something calm and reasonable about, hey, like, let's be charitable about this. Let's try to understand where these people are coming from. you don't get likes on those. You get likes on your super hot takes about how progressives are crazy, or how, look at what the Republicans are doing, they're racist. Those are the ones, like Candace Owens, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, she has a lot of power now. Or is it Charlie Kirk?
I don't know him. It sounds familiar, though.
I feel bad calling individuals out. I don't know Candace Owens. Perhaps she's a perfectly decent human. I'm sure I could enjoy a drink with her. But a lot of her takes are needlessly provocative. And you're not going to persuade anybody. Nobody's going to read one of those takes and think, you know what, I should change my mind, or like think about this more carefully. All they're going to do is become more entrenched in their own position and feel that they're besieged by these people. And that's what gets rewarded on Twitter. And I should be the first to say, I do this too. I really try not to, and I try to be what Robert Wright calls a mindful tweeter, I guess. But every once in a while, I get irritated and I launch one off that's, mean-spirited or something. And often it'll get a lot of likes, and then I feel good about myself for a little bit until I really reflect on it later. And I'm like, okay, what did that accomplish?
Yeah.
And I also should say, even that woke paper for Quillette, I thought it was kind of sardonic, and maybe that was appropriate. But there's a part of me, and I should say even one of the editors said this, so I should give him credit for this. Part of me thought I probably wrote that in a needlessly mocking kind of way. And like, is somebody from the quote woke camp, are they going to read that and think, you know what? This guy is really being fair to us, and I need to like consider what I'm doing here. Probably not, right? So, I mean, there's a place for satire. Voltaire is one of my favorite thinkers, and obviously he was brilliantly satirical, but for the most part, as I guess I said in the centrism, the second one, I believe you're referring to, the sphere of centrism, like, really to have this kind of discourse, even if, again, it can be heated, but mocking the other side's probably not going to contribute to common understanding, right?
Yeah. Well, it's difficult because you have to. It goes back to like the Plato or Socrates versus the sophists. Like Socrates is nominally after truth, and the sophists say truth doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is power, or convincing people. If nobody is convinced of truth, then what matters? Truth. And so in the rhetorical sphere, which is what we're being more and more heavily invested in social media, we do have to rely on either wit or insight or mockery or all these different kind of secondary tier, like if truth and reality are first tier, then all these different modalities of conveying truth are second level or second order.
We should note that the sophists were portrayed by Plato, so perhaps they were actually decent dudes.
Are you saying that Plato had a bias?
I'm saying he just might have. But yeah, that's an interesting. I think both you and I would agree, right? That, look, like very few people, I include myself in this group, are totally 100% dispassionately interested in the truth. So rhetoric is going to matter to some degree, right? The hope is that you increase the concern for truth and decrease the sort of rhetorical pyrotechnics and look, I like wit. Wit is cool. My friend and I talk about this a lot about, well, she has like this tweeting diagram for should you tweet it or shouldn't you? And basically we both conclude though that if you're funny, that does give you a little leeway, right? Yeah. But yeah, you're right. There is a lot of, especially on a format that requires 280 characters or whatever, and that people aren't really even on there, I don't think, to engage honestly with other people a lot. I mean, maybe a little. I am. I know I like it, and I'm sure other people are. I don't want to say that they aren't at all, but I'm convinced, this is a thought that I've had, see what you think about this. I think humans like to be self-righteously outraged, and that one thing people do, and I even find myself doing this despite despising the fact that I'm doing it, going on Twitter and scrolling through and just finding the stupidest opinion possible and then getting irritated about it and almost feeling good that I'm irritated about this stupid opinion.
Yeah.
Does that resonate with you or make any sense?
It does, but like I treat it as a writing prompt. Can I cleverly debunk this thing? Can I use the knot of feelings that I have to untie something and to break it somehow, or release some new flavor in the dialogue?
That's a fruitful way of approaching it, is it not? Huh?
Yeah. That's the way to do it.
Here's the question then. When you do that, do you ever check yourself and think, okay, this person's probably a good person who's trying to understand the world. So, like, let's relax here. You know what I mean? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Last night, I do this. And this is why I started to, instead of retweeting a tweet, I'll take a screenshot of what I'm going to retweet, and then I'll scrub out the name. So, so it doesn't become a personal attack. So we can just,
that's interesting.
We can remove but there's a problem with that because I'm removing the other person from the conversation.
Right.
I'm relieving them from the battering that I'm dishing out, and possibly relieving myself from, getting on a block list or something like that. But then I'm denying them the ability to give a response, and I'm reinforcing the echo chamber effect. But I'm at least sparing that personal that personal aspect of a personal attack. So I've thought about that a lot, and I thought
one thing I try to do, and I really feel bad that I said something personal about. I don't even know Candace Owens, by the way. She may be very delightful. I don't know anything about her, but one thing I try to think about is, how would I feel about this person's tweet if I were good friends with the person? Right, because, you just have this charity that you extend to your friends, and when they make these tweets, you might be like, oh, he's just being kind of provocative for fun or whatever. That's just kind of how he is. But when you don't like the person or you don't know them, it's really easy just to think, oh, this is like, there they go again with their just silly opinion, trying to be provocative, So that's why face-to-face conversation is just so much better, because you understand the person as a human being. Like they might have kids, they have a house, they're just trying to live a life and be a decent human being. Their opinions aren't the only things about them that matter, you know?
Their opinions are rooted in an embodiedness, historically, physically, all this other stuff. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really crucial thing that we miss from on Twitter. Is just like a bunch of disembodied opinions, right? Yeah. It's instead of like your neighbor who, like, even if you like, I really like my landlord, super nice guy, nice family. I have no idea what his political opinions are, right? It doesn't even, if he told me I'm 100% down with Trump, I'd just be like, cool, like I understand that you're a human. I don't agree. I didn't vote for Trump, but whatever. Yeah. And that's what you don't get on Twitter. You just don't get any of that story. And that feeds into the virtuing culture, or like it's almost like this disembodied virtue sphere. Like if I threw out all these virtues, then I get all these points and stuff. And what I try to, what I think possibly, and tell me what you think about this. You brought up that not all virtue signaling is bad. Like if you're virtuing your altruistic behavior or scientific behavior, and I think of that more as modeling. I'm going to model a certain behavior, and it's not like about me. It's not so, which means that it's not so much about me being seen as something, so much as me showing how a certain behavior acts. And and that's one of the reasons why I do so many interviews, because I want to model discourse. I want to model within the format of face-to-face long form stuff.
Well, I like I think the interview format's great, and it's a really good way to do it. I'm not 100% sure I follow the modeling on, say, giving to charity. Well, let's just say that. Let's step back and say this, and then you can say what you think about that. But let's suppose that giving to charity in certain cases is just flat out, look at how good of a person I am.
Yeah.
Let's say that's the like motivation.
Yeah.
That's still good. You know, at the end of the day, the person's still giving money to charity, so that's still like better than a lot of things the person could be doing.
Yeah.
Now, you might be right. There might be a better way to handle that. There might be this modeling idea that, you know, it may be that giving to charity only to feel good about oneself isn't as good as having legitimate, like, proximate concerns about people, but it's still giving to people. And that's why I think I hear it's easy to get fed up with virtue signaling. I hear a lot of criticism of virtue signaling, but I often think to myself, look, there are a lot worse things one could signal. One could signal cruelty or depravity, etc. I'd rather people signal virtue.
Okay, yeah, that's true. That's true. But at the end of the day, in woke culture, if it doesn't collapse on an actual, like, actually putting your money where your mouth is, like, I guess that's where the line is. Like, if you're...
Well, the other... I'm sorry, I interrupted.
No, go on.
Well, I guess I just wanted to add that the other thing about woke culture is I think virtue signaling for a lot of it is misguided. That's a misguided analysis. I don't think a lot of woke culture is virtue signaling. I think it's education signaling, it's intelligence signaling, it's creativity and open-mindedness signaling, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of the things aren't even, I mean, they're like vaguely connected to virtue concerns, but they're really not. They're more about I'm a better human being than you are because I'm more sophisticated. You're a backwater Trump voter. I'm a cosmopolitan. I travel the globe, look at all the flags of the countries that I've, been to. That doesn't seem really like virtue signaling.
Okay.
If you accept the qualification, I don't know.
Yeah. Do you envision, well, back to like, how do we counter that, or how do we dismiss it in a way where people are open to another way of behaving? Did you get cut off?
Yeah, I got cut off just for a moment.
Should I repeat my question?
Yes, I didn't get any of it.
Well, okay, so to go back to your feelings about the woke article, like, can you take that another step further? Like, you described this problem, maybe you're a little snarky, which is good because you get more clicks and more people are like seeing the idea or seeing your argument. Once you get them in the door, you have to get them in the door,
Sure.
and then you can start to... Are there solutions to it? Are there counters to wokeness such that it
yeah, that's a good question.
Without turning people off, turning them on to something better, or maybe it does the whole project of wokeness, like what appears week after week in the New York Times. Like, did you hear like what appeared yesterday? Like, some guy wants to start an I am sexist campaign.
Yeah, I saw he said he was sexist because he looked at a girl's butt when he was 15.
Yes.
And I thought, in other words, you're a normal human.
Okay, well, that's the question then. Like, is sexism normal, or are they pathologizing a normal behavior, turning it into something?
I mean, yeah, this is where the great awakening pun is sort of, it really gets at something, that there's a kind of puritanical fanaticism about some of this, right? Like, normal, completely innocuous sexual, not even behavior really, just like looking at people's parts that you evolved to be attracted to, that one should flagellate oneself about that. Now, I should say, by the way, I haven't read the article. I saw quotes out of context, so that was one of the quotes that I saw. Yeah, that's strange, and that kind of does get to the this I'm so committed to the cause that I feel repulsed about my own normal behavior. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, almost like people in communist countries who would just like flagellate them. So, like in the Cultural Revolution, I'm not an expert on it, but you know, these people would profusely apologize, and they had to go through these public ordeals to say that they were to show how committed they were to this new culture, right?
Yeah.
That's reminds me of some of this stuff. Now, I guess the question you were asking is there a what's like the direct, like how can we guide people or something? Yeah. So I think it's important, and I got some pushback on this that I think is probably unfortunate, although I suppose it's an empirical question. I think a lot of these people do, underneath all of this, like this costume, there is this concern, this real concern about social justice that we should all really attempt to appeal to. And so what I think we should do is say, look, like if you really care about this cause, we do too. And the way that we most help like this group or most make a more just society is by appealing to broad coalitions of people.
Yeah.
You know, let's stop concerning ourselves with who's dressing up as Black Panther this Halloween and start looking at these issues that we care about and work together on them. I guess that's what I would say is sort of maybe play their real concerns against their signaling and say, like, your signaling's actually contradicting your stated concerns.
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, like with the Halloween thing now, and I saw this, like every October, people start signaling that cultural appropriation's wrong. And now it's gotten to a point where a whole bunch more people are signaling how stupid it is. So everybody's now waiting for somebody to say that argument so that everybody else can counter the argument.
Yes,
so it's just kind of like, okay, it's already a closed loop now. Now everybody's just recycling.
Yeah, it is. It reminds me of like the really cliched movie plot about the obsessed detective and the serial killer who need each other, quote unquote, and they're like, you know, I define you or whatever.
Yeah.
That's kind of what they're in this very like mutually dependent relationship of the woke people and then the people who are here just to piss them off.
Yeah, the Kekistanis, the trolls.
Yeah, it reminds me of there was that gentleman who said, you know, my culture isn't your goddamn prom dress or whatever. Yeah. And then, of course, the other people on the other side, and it just turns into this furious, you know, denunciations and recriminations. I've thought a lot about what you're saying there, which is, I wonder, sometimes it's just good to ignore stupid.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like a lot of stupid stuff is going to happen on a college campus because you have 18 to 22-year-olds. Like, we don't have to blow that up and put it on the National Review every time a college student proposes a stupid idea.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. You're right. With regards to Evergreen State College, I think about this because I was at the college when the protest happened, and I watched the media backlash.
Did you go there?
Yeah.
Did you attend? You were a student. Okay, yeah. Interesting.
I was in the library building when it was blockaded.
Oh, okay, really?
Over. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and I started reporting on that, and because everybody was just reacting to it, and I wanted to give a little bit more into the story. And then I watch myself getting a lot of attention and then being self-critical about the attention, being self-critical about my criticism of this stuff, and trying to map it onto something larger. Like, what are the lessons that we can learn from this? Because that particular example went so overboard. And when I look at it and I research it, it's because that happened in a culture that fostered that. Like there's a story here why this happened. It comes back. So I'm tracing like a causal. I'm telling a story. I'm not just making a judgment on it. And so so I wonder if leading. Now it's a statement in the quest for a question, but
Well, I think I get what you're kind of going off of what I was saying. So I was saying, like, maybe we don't need to front page every stupid thing. But no, it seems to me, and I'm not an expert on the Evergreen State, the events that happened there, but those seem to me pretty extreme.
Yeah.
My understanding of it. And that deserves attention and analysis. And I think if you're thinking about it self-critically, you're probably doing a good job, and you're not just putting it, you know, like, I sympathize with, say, the National Review. Like, I understand you need clicks, but you can see they do these things simply for clicks. They just do the look at what, you know, what idiotic idea prevailed today on Princeton's campus or something.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of stuff, probably best to ignore. Evergreen State, no, I don't think we should ignore that. I think that's important. Lindsay Shepherd, that's important. A lot of these things are important. Charles Murray at Middlebury.
Yeah.
I think we do need to analyze those things. I think what we want to do is do it in such a way that the protesters don't feel as though they're just getting the attention that they crave, and they don't feel as though, okay, yep, the enemies are out, and this just confirms that we need to protest even harder next time, you know?
Yeah. So it seems like what you're saying is that there's an event that grabs attention, but the job of the truly educated, and I don't mean that as a signal, but I mean somebody who practices interaction with things in an educated way, is to get to the analysis, is to start to ask questions like, why is this important? What's underneath this rock that you want to pick up and throw? Like, what's going on underneath?
Right. What's the underlying culture? How did we get here? Like, you know, Evergreen State. See, I guess I should read some of your writing about it. Maybe you can send it to me. Yeah. Pardon?
It's all video.
Okay. Maybe I should go back and watch some of it, because I'm interested in it. Because to me, a complete outsider, it just seemed like a bolt of lightning out of a blue sky. Like, I had no idea. I guess, you know, I heard from other people, I guess Evergreen State was pretty famous for being woke, if you will. Yeah. But all of a sudden it was just like madness, right? I mean, it seemed that way, at least. So yeah, it's really, I do think that it is important to analyze that, and maybe even ahead of time to think about, like, hey, we're creating a culture here in which contrary opinions, not only are they dismissed, but they provoke a furious reaction from students. And then, and this seems to be a consistent theme, is like the feckless administrators, right? Administrators pretty consistently just letting the students do what they want, right? Or are totally caving to them, instead of saying, look, like, here's the line. If you do this, you're gone. You're out of our school. That's it. You're done. You know what I mean? I don't know if that's true at Evergreen, but it certainly seems to be the case in some of these other stories that I've read about, and also, I don't know your experience at Evergreen State, but administrators are just super progressive, right? Like, you know, there was that Quillette article. I think it was like, maybe it wasn't Quillette. I apologize if it wasn't, but it was something like, or somebody maybe even just said this in a tweet. It was like, if you think students are progressive, wait until you talk to administrators, right?
No, yeah. And have you studied, it seems like we go from equalitarianism into wokeness, and then wokeness can go critical. And so I'm just wondering if you've, like, studied, like, the psychological progression, or like what is the psychology in play when a group of people cannot stand whatsoever a contrary opinion and absolutely need to castigate that?
I mean, I really think I'd have to think of it case by case, but I think in general, it really is this. So suppose somebody said to you, I just like to cook infants and eat them. I think it's a good thing to do. You could see how outraged, you'd be like, that is 100% right. Like, you can't do that. That's terrible. I think that's how some of these people feel about the mere suggestion that just stating facts, like stating IQ disparity, just sticking to the facts, not even speculating about causes, merely stating the fact, these people view it as an intolerable moral transgression.
Yeah.
Similar to eating infants or beating helpless puppies or something like that. And like, I don't know how you correct that, like that mission-oriented sensitivity, you know, because that is what I said, like earlier about Twitter. That kind of self-righteousness, I think people really enjoy that feeling. It's this animating emotion, and you feel as though you're upset and angry about the right thing because you're a good person, and you're going to call out those people who have that intolerable opinion. So that's actually I've thought about that a lot, and I've also thought about, and to my knowledge, there isn't a lot of research on this, what's the difference between, I don't want to suggest that we're members of the elite here, but people like you and me who could have this conversation, and you could raise an idea that I thought was totally wrong, but I wouldn't be offended by it. I'd be like, well, let's think that one through. And my friends are like this too, because I say a lot of things that I need people to be chill about so we can work through these ideas, right? That's what we should do, is expect the best from each other, know we're coming from a good place, and work it, even if it's a dangerous idea, let's work it through. So what's the difference between people like that and people who get easily offended, whom you say something to that may be a little bit controversial, and all of a sudden they're chastising you? I mean, I don't know if you've had that experience, but and I certainly have as well. You know, I've been scolded and called names or whatever, and obviously it's unpleasant. And I just think, okay, like what trait is it that causes that? And I don't know, and I don't know that there's a lot of research on it. Like like moral sensitivity, or you know something like that, or like thinking that this opinion, I mean, I think these people do think like something Trump says is literally similar to Adolf Hitler. Yeah. You know, I don't think they're exaggerating when they make the comparison, because they think that it's true.
Yeah, but when those people own the conversation of the counter movement to Trump, when those extreme voices who see everything as Nazism are the strongest proponents of that which would actually get Trump out of power, then they are, again, they're acting in a way that's actually going to have the opposite effect of what
they absolutely are. And I think one clear case of that was the Kavanaugh hearings, right? Where it does seem as though it definitely helped Republicans, at least in the Senate. I know the 538 model now has the Republican victory in the Senate is, 5 out of 6 or something. And I saw this, I saw the Women's March Twitter page. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Women's March page, but they had every Republican congressperson who was in the Judiciary Committee with apologist for rape or rape apologist on a card of the person, every single one of them. And I just thought to myself, do they believe that? Maybe they do. I mean, maybe we accuse them of being dishonest. Like, that seems dishonest, but maybe to them, they were, I mean, what happened at the hearing and afterward was literally apologetics for rape. I don't know. Yeah.
No, it's not. I don't think of it as dishonesty. I just think of it as inherently weak, not weak-mindedness, but they're opening themselves up to so much ridicule by acting. Sure. I mean, it's impossible to parody. It's like
it really is. It is.
It seems like during the George W. Bush era was the rise of The Daily Show, the rise of a whole slew of comedic stuff against the conservatives, and there was a lot to ridicule, and there was a lot to make fun of, but something turned over where the left or the liberals have lost their ability, one, to laugh at themselves, and two, to not act in a way that's openly, it's just baldly open to ridicule. Like they're almost self-parroting now, because like it's gone so far in that direction. And I wonder, like, this is just a nascent idea, but I wonder if going down the road of the Daily Show becoming like the format through which news and opinion operates on the left kind of like progress to a point where they can't, I don't know. I wonder if like
they can't actually analyze.
They can't analyze, or they can't. Yeah, they can't self-reflect. Like if you look at the difference between Samantha Bee and her show, I don't know. I don't really watch it, but I did one analysis of that.
It's pretty intolerable, isn't it?
It's intolerable.
It's hard to deal with. Yeah,
and it's not funny at all. You're just supposed to like. They're dressing up their opinions in such a tone that it's supposed to be funny, and that worked when George Bush was going on, because there was a little bit of nuance going on. But with Trump, somehow Trump like has brought that to its end, because even Trump, it's like you can't even parody Trump, because Trump's a walking parody too. So everybody,
we're hitting the end of parody almost on both sides. It's interesting. I have the same like reaction to John Oliver. I don't know if you ever pay attention to him, but like, it's just, I don't know. It's like, maybe if I went back and watched the day, I'd become more conservative across age. I don't want to say like, I still have a lot of socially liberal opinions, which is why I consider myself basically in the center, but I've definitely become much more sympathetic to conservative positions and viewpoints. And I wonder if that's affected the way I view these shows and the way I just see, like a Samantha Bee bit, for example. I just see like, is she not aware of how intolerant she sounds about any opinion that isn't within her like bubble? Like the way that they ridicule opinions and what they do, that I do think there's a bit of an asymmetry here. They moralize the opinions in a way that I'm not saying conservatives don't moralize a lot, but I'm not afraid of conservatives morally attacking me the way I'm afraid of progressives morally attacking me. Like if I were talking to a conservative, I would feel a lot more comfortable confessing all of my opinions than the average progressive. Now, to be clear, I have a lot of very liberal friends who are super intelligent and tolerant of all kinds of viewpoints. I don't want to say that all progressives are like that, but they do scare me in a way that conservatives do not. Because they wield social power, or because their moral, toolkit is so exacting? Yeah, that's a good point. So it may be the social power that really makes me fearful, because I suppose like if a conservative, for example, criticized me for believing in natural selection, I wouldn't care, because what are they going to do about it? Whereas if you get called an ist name by a social progressive, especially on a campus, that's a really big deal, because they have a lot of power, and you actually could lose your career, your status, etc. So yeah, that might be true. It may be that I'm more sensitive to their sensitivity because it does wield power. Yeah, and there's a loss of the preponderance of evidence. Oh, for sure. And that's really scary to me. And it's something that I don't understand why progressives are supporting this sort of veering toward getting rid of due process and believe everything and not being, I mean, that seems to me precisely the opposite of what they should support, right? Yeah, I think that's the strongest, like the civility argument. I made this observation in a live stream a couple weeks ago, but the civility argument, like when Hillary came out a couple weeks ago and said, like, when we win back the Senate, then civility. Right. And my reaction is that if progressives don't have civility, then what do they have? Yeah, I was actually just nonplussed by that. I could not believe she said that. I thought it was just everything that I thought you were supposed to stand for as, I guess, a quote unquote progressive. civility, due process, right? These are really important concepts that have been sacrificed on the altar of wokeness, I guess.
Is it a claim to power? It's got to be. I try to figure out why they're sacrificing something so fundamental.
And I honestly think it's the
short-term game.
I'm not sure that okay, so that may be, you might be right. I wonder, though, I really think it's this sacred value about perceived victims groups is so strong that it sort of cannibalizes all of the other concerns. So, like, you can see it in the hashtag believe all women.
Yeah.
Like, look, like, obviously, I think I'm a decent human being, and I'm sure you think you are. We care about real victims. Like, that's horrible. We're all for that. But that doesn't mean you believe everyone. Obviously, there are fraudulent accusations, and we should care about that. So, but I think because women are perceived as a victims group, and that becomes more important to a certain segment of the left than the abstract concept of due process, right?
Yeah.
And they're just willing to make the trade-off because the victims group is so much more important.
Yeah, to the extent that they begin to victimize another group.
Yes, but the group that they're victimizing is white men, and they don't care about white men right now.
No, well, that's a refrain. I was wondering, I wanted to hear your thoughts on that, like, because that's what I saw at Evergreen during my time there, like over and over and over and over and over again. White men were ridiculed. White men had to like self-flagellate. White men, like, always like the bad guy. And halfway through my time there, I'm like, do you guys not see that this is exactly not,
right.
exactly what happened in Germany, like it's the exact same thing. You find a flashpoint. Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff call this common enemy identity politics rather than, and they contrast that to common humanity.
I like that. I think there's a lot of psychological research and evidence behind this idea that a common enemy binds people together. Yeah. Right. So if you can pick out a common enemy, then you're going to have more cohesion in your group. And often it feels good, right? It's like we're together and we have the enemy, and the enemy is this class of capitalist white men exploiters who have done everything evil in everything bad in the world, right? Yeah. Is the fault of white male capitalists, excuse me. So you're right. I like that it's disconcerting because it's also, again, it's so counterproductive because at some point white males are going to flee. I mean, I don't know what the exact current breakdown of voting is between Republicans and Democrats for white men, but I know white men lean Republican. But this is certainly not a way to bring them into the Democratic coalition, right? Having a large segment of your coalition actively and forcefully promote the notion that whiteness is almost some kind of malady. Yeah. Right. Did you see all of the articles after the Kavanaugh hearings that just talked about white male tears and white male rage? And it was astonishing. Could you imagine if you wrote those same articles, but you changed the demographic group? Yeah. You would be accused rightfully of just base racism.
And why is that allowed? Why is that okay?
Well, okay, so there's probably one practical reason that's fair, I think, to accept, which is that white males do have more power than other groups on average. I mean, I'm not saying that's the way we should think about it.
But on the group level of thinking.
Yes, yeah. Okay. If we do the group level of thinking, that is true. And therefore, there's probably something of a legitimate argument that it's more threatening if you did that about a group that didn't have a lot of power. I think that's fair, but I also think... But
you're still doing it.
Yes, yeah. I was going to say, I don't think it's right. And I think there's also, that's where there's a Rihan Salam article in The Atlantic, and then David French wrote about it at the National Review, and actually they greatly influenced that woke article that my brother and I wrote. They talked about this anti-whiteness as a signal, basically. Anti-whiteness is a signal that these elite, the more anti-white you say you are, the better to these elite. And then, I think that's part of it. And then part of it is, as ugly as it is to accept, and I think we should be charitable, but in the abstract, there probably is just a lot of hatred towards white males, because people are taught, I just think about my own education, we're taught basically that Western civilization has been a pockmark on planet Earth, right? It's just been this destructive force, taught about all of these bad things, slavery, colonialism, imperialism, all of these terrible things that white males have done. And I think actually a lot of people build up some hatred for that. I don't think they would hate us as individuals. Like if you talk to one of these people, it'll probably be fine with you. But as a group, it's easy to hate, right?
Yeah. Okay.
You build up, I don't know if that's right. I'm totally speculating, of course, but
I have this.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I have this thought that when you participate in this sort of, you say that this group is the enemy, and you carve out an enemy, that excuses all criticism from having to be pointed inward. So it's you're almost like you're free of sin in a way. You're free of fault. Let's say, because all the fault has been displaced onto the scapegoat.
Right. I see.
And so so what you were saying, the really inconvenient fact of being a centrist is that you have to doubt yourself. Like you put yourself out there and you're like, well, let's go through and let's revise and let's refine, So and it's inefficient to do that.
Yes, it's very inefficient.
In the short term. But the thing is, over the long term, you get better and better and better at what you want to do.
That's the hope. Now, to be fair, I would say a lot of people just don't have the time to do that. They honestly don't, right? They work a job. They're doing. I get paid to think, so I'm lucky.
Yeah.
And I understand that, which is why I would just like a broader narrative about kind of being civil and being tolerant and making compromises. This is something I hate to say this, but I gotta get off in like a couple minutes if
Absolutely.
that's okay.
Yeah.
But just I have to teach a class. But
awesome.
I will end by saying this, and then you can say what you think about it. Shoot, I forgot what I was going to say, actually. It was the most profound thought of the entire interview, and it just slipped my mind. Okay. Oh, yeah, I know. Here, I've got it. I get a lot of people get really irritated because I call for compromise, and I say, even if you think the other side's 100% wrong, you have to live with them. That's 50% of the population. So if you want to have a society that coheres, you're going to have to give something, even if you think it's wrong. Like compromise, I do think centrism is about having the debate, hearing it out, trying to find the truth. But it's also a little bit of, we're going to be willing to compromise even when we think you're wrong. We'll give you an issue that you care about because that's what you do when you live together in a huge society and you want to maintain social cohesion.
Yeah. I wonder if that echo chamber, this is kind of a tired phrase, the echo chamber makes us think that we don't have to compromise.
It very well might. Like, we don't have to because I don't live with those people. Yeah. I don't have to be around them, and I don't want to be. Yeah.
Yeah, until you look at actually where all your electricity is coming, all the invisible things that are going on.
Of course, that's invisible, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, thanks a lot, Bo. Enjoy your class.
I had a blast. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it. Maybe I'll watch myself if I can stand it when you put it up, and I'll go back and watch some of your other videos.
All right, man. Well,
all right, great. Thanks a lot.
Class. Have a good night.
Yep, have a good one. Thank you.